amazing original thinker. But he's an amazing original thinker, but also Randy, who's doing the presentation, has a really good firsthand knowledge of RAYID, and they apply it in their everyday lives. And that's what we're all about, trying to find out how to do this in our everyday lives. And so I'm, with no further ado, I'm going to let Jenny and Randy take over, and we'll spend an hour or so learning a little bit about the iris and how it fits into the ever-evolving RAYID.
Wow. Well, as you know, these are extraordinary times, and I think it takes our most enthusiastic, diligent efforts to do what we can to make a difference in the world. And I don't know, honestly, that studying the iris will get us there, but I don't know it won't. So I think it's really important we take every opportunity to learn what we can, apply what we can, and take it forward. RAYID for me really was a download inspiration, and its primary purpose was to become closer to another human being. For me, the primary purpose of studying the iris is to develop a rapport and appreciation and an actual ability to relate to another person on a deeper level. So that's my use of the iris. You know, it's quite something to just come in there with a light and look at the right eye, look at the left eye, make a few little measurements, and start to talk about something very personal, very unique about that person. And with the practice that you can have, it is very, very emotional and touching and developmental. Now, the goal is to be able to do it so well that you can help that person or yourself be able to aspire and grow beyond where we currently are. Now, my use of the iris really is about very simple components that become more and more complex. So it's always, for me, about just two parts. I'm always looking for what the two parts are. In some cases, it's mother and father, and that's right eye and left eye being the father, left eye being the mother, and how those two irises fit together. But when I'm looking at the irises, I'm also becoming aware of, they had two parents, and they had two parents. And all of that constitutional framework is all there. And you find out later on that your constitutional type, if you could see, and in some cases I've made 4-generation families, you will not find the same constitution repeated anywhere. So all of us are a completely unique fingerprint, but we're made up of the same patterns. You probably already know that all fingerprints are made up of 3 patterns: ridges, loops, and whorls. And we have our fingerprint, about the 12th week of gestation, fingerprints are already forming and they last a lifetime. For me, the iris is very much like that, but it forms slower. It takes sometimes years for it to form, but it does form, and very seldom do we ever actually see it really change. So the question is, what do we do with this composite of an individual who is also inside of a framework of a family tree? And whether you know it or not, those influences, genetically, epigenetically, and so on, are constantly bombarding you. Every moment of every day, you're being influenced by your mother and your father, their parents and their parents, and you're an echo chamber of all of these social emotional patterns vibrating inside of you, and they are doing these very fast left, right, yin, yang, sweet, sour, opposite functions all the time. How I handle it determines my symptoms, my well-being, my happiness, and so on. So for me, it's just how to get all this to work. So I'm interested in how do these systems fit together, and what can I do to participate in the healthiest, wisest use of it? So what I'd like is Brandy to jump in and show you some pictures. And most of you who've done any irises, you already know about the pictures, and the iris books are available lots of places. So we're not going to try to teach you a lot of iris constitutional differences. We want to show you what we're actually doing now. Brandy?
Yes. So it does help to have a little bit of a background on iris for some of the newer work that we're doing, and I'll touch upon that towards the end. But I really want to be able to show you irises so that you can get a sense of who's in front of you. And that's part of what the RAYID iris will reveal. So I'm going to share my screen now. Here we go. Right. So again, thanks to Betty Sue for inviting us. And I'm going to talk to you a lot about these two books, or most of the information can be found in these two books. Oh, that's interesting. It didn't get cut. I'll have to see what happened here. Give me a second, because I think I have to go back in. So I was working on this. Lynn can relate when we're redoing a talk hours before we have to give it. I have to reload the newer version. There we go. So I'll talk about iris and what the eye reveals, and then I'll talk about the different iris structures, because those different structures, just like the fingerprint, are what will give you an indication of who that person in front of you is and what their general personality constitution is. But then it also is related to birth order, and that birth order can give you more information if you're not quite sure about what the iris is giving you, but the iris plus the birth order plus the general morphology of the body. And again, we don't have time to go into all of that, but our hope is actually to do another webinar next month where we'll touch upon the birth order a bit more and go into the morphology. But I'm going to introduce some of those topics today, and then introduce the family systems and how the iris relates to different relationships. Also, the different body parts and different chakras are all connected to the iris, the birth order, and some of the family systems. But most importantly, we're utilizing all that information in the newest RAYID divination, if you will, or the cycles and seasons, which is really about being in harmony with nature and looking at iris through time. So looking at different times of the day, different seasons of the year, and the energies associated with them, and how we can actually look at that from the irises and then be able to help our soul grow. So I know it's a lot to take in, but we're going to do our best to go over all of this and give you an understanding of the iris and the newest information, which is really what we feel is the antidote, or really the only thing that you can do in these times, is to be personally responsible for yourself, for your own energies, and learn how to develop your soul. So let's just talk about basic iris structure. So you can think about the iris as a reflection of the individual, but also the individual's life potential. It's going to give you character strengths, aspects of the personality that may be underdeveloped. And RAYID uses the iris of the eye to affirm and strengthen the different structures of the individual, the different character structure. Those structures will give us information about that individual. And then you can also look at the irises in relationship to the birth order, family systems, looking at, as Denny mentioned, the mother versus the father eye, and then looking at significant events, injuries or ailments or things that are coming up for that individual along a certain timeline. So when we look at the iris, we're looking at not just that structure, but we're trying to look at many other aspects of that individual so that we can assist them in development and in healing and in being in harmony with divine order. So as you mentioned, the right and left iris structures are almost like a window into the genetics. So you can see where the epigenetics are coming down through the family system into the eyes, literally. Left eye typically reflects traits from the mother's side, and the right eye typically reflects traits from the father's side, which is also similar in Chinese medicine as well. So when you look at those eyes, you can get a sense of where some of the epigenetic problems are coming from. So for example, if you are an iridologist or you followed some of the physical iridology, if you find a problem with the kidneys in the right eye, then more likely that's coming from the father's side of the family. Again, we're not going to get into that. We're really going to stick to the RAYID iris characteristics. So this looks like a lot, but I'm going to spend a lot of time going through each one of these and then showing some pictures of the different iris types so that you get a sense of what you're looking at. You can see the two primary types are the jewel and the flower, and that will come up over and over. So you'll see that we've got, those are the main two personality types that show up. And then there's modifiers to those primary structures. And Denny can jump in here and there if you'd like to talk about that jewel flower relationship. I think after a couple more slides, it'll be clearer what I'm talking about. The term jewel corresponds to these little brownish spots. So when you see an iris that has lots of dot-like pigments in the iris, they're typically thinkers, verbal processors. Those are your engineers. Those are for anybody that is a practitioner, those are the clients that are asking lots of questions, wants to double check, and they typically don't stop talking, and they learn best visually. So they want to see it, they want to understand it. The flower structure is more visual, they're more spatial, and you'll see they look like little flower petals. They have these curved openings in the iris, and they're the emotional and feeling oriented. They tend to be more spontaneously expressive. They learn best auditorily, and they can actually stop talking. They can actually be overwhelmed easily and then not talk. Some of the secondary types are modifying those primary structures. The stream is the more kinesthetic. They have more of a uniform fiber, so there's not really any dots or flowers, as you see above here. They tend to communicate through touch and movement and learn by doing. So I'm happy to have Lynn Hellerstein on here. She would get it. She has a book called See It, Say It, and Do It. And that's those first three that you've seen. And then the third embodies all of those. The shakers is a combination, very expansive. And you can see that there's dots and flowers. And those are much more dynamic, progressive, more extremist in their personality. Yet, even though each individual has more of certain characteristics, they're typically all four. I mean, you're not necessarily pigeonholing them into any one. And all of those four are modified by their birth order, their history, lifestyle practices as well. So typically in the field of iridology, they might give people certain herbs or vitamins, supplements for certain characteristics or certain spots that they might see in here. And that would be how they would not necessarily diagnose problems, but find ways to support that inherent structure. Again, that can be done. We're really not going to be going into any of that. We're going to be talking about it more from a soul growth standpoint. So the next slide gives you the four that we just talked about. the flower, upper left, stream, bottom left, jewel with all the brown spots, bottom right, and the shaker, which is the upper right. So just a little bit more on each one of these characteristics so that you can kind of get a better sense of them. The jewel, again, has these brown spots, and they look like little freckles on the eye. As I mentioned, these are the mental types, analytical thinking. They have that internal thought, and they're always analyzing. Again, typically you're engineers, and they like to learn visually. And they're very typically watchful, observant. They like to read. They tend to be more focused on details. In syntonics, which is I'm an optometrist, so we do a lot with using colored light to heal. Those types of people will be more aesthetic. So what that means is they might be more thin in their morphology. And again, that's going to be modified by the birth order. These types of patients tend to be very organized, categorizing, naming things. Again, very verbal communicators. They can be teachers, scientists, leaders, but they can also be critical, often future-oriented, sometimes more far-sighted than nearsighted. Some of the challenges that they can tend to be controlling, but then don't like to be controlled or criticized. Again, What the Eye Revealed book has a lot of these details and charts on all of this if you want to read further. Some of the lessons for somebody that's a jewel is to learn to flow, to express their feelings, to be more flower-like. So again, in relationships, typically a jewel would be more likely with the flower because the opposites attract, and that's what they need to learn and grow with, is to learn how to let go and not be so detail-oriented. The flower, on the other hand, has those open petals and flowers, and they tend to be more feeling, more, experiential. They tend to be flexible, spontaneous, changeable, creative, sociable. They tend to be a little bit more flamboyant. So very different than that jewel type. And they can also get a little bit more distracted, lose interest. Picnic means that they could tend to be a little bit almost like the larger in life and a larger body. They like to communicate with gestures and imagery, again, kind of on stage, theatrical, commanding, but they can also be reactive and blaming or self-attacking. So ideally, they're going to learn to trust themselves, be more focused, accept responsibility. The challenge, again, in a relationship, the jewel personality is going to be a little bit more controlling, dominant, and then the flower is going to feel either abandoned or suffocated and wanting freedom. So again, looking at some of these patterns, it's amazing how often you'll see couples where one is the flower, one is the jewel, and it's really overt. And sometimes it's not as overt, but typically there is that dichotomy because that's, again, what they're learning. The next pattern, which is the modifying pattern, and again, I'm going to show you some more pictures so you can understand that a little bit better. This is the stream where you can see it actually looks like flowing water. So uniform fibers kind of in a radial fashion around the iris. That's the more kinesthetic, more grounded type, very intuitive, very physical. They perceive through the sensory experiences of the body. So they like the hands-on, proprioceptive, they're doers. They tend to be balancing and nurture others. But yet they tend to be a little bit slower to change. So they tend to work in athletics, healthcare, public service, again, kind of the grounded, they help to structure society and help to balance others. And they're just that, the syntonic body type is very balanced. They will help to contribute to this stability in a relationship and also in society. Unfortunately, where their challenges would be in feeling helpless. So they often need to find a purpose. They need to learn to trust others and not be so holding, because they can also be a little bit controlling. So they have to learn how to trust and release. When we talk about the birth order positions, you'll see too that all of that, the different birth order positions, correspond in many ways to this flower jewel dynamic. And that's really what we're learning, is how to balance ourselves. So no matter, again, whatever our iris pattern is, the goal is actually to be fluid and be able to move through both a visual way of communicating, a verbal way of communicating, and a kinesthetic way of communicating, and be able to be balanced with any person or situation or community. The shaker personalities have this combination, which is interesting, because you've got the flower, but then you've also got the jewels. So you've got the spots, you've got the flowers, and then you've got the stream, where you have the little stream connecting pieces here. And a shaker pattern, it can look very different depending on whether it's more of a flower shaker or a jewel shaker. So again, you'll have, this one appears to be more of a flower because the petals seem a lot more dominant. And then you'll see some others as well. So those personalities tend to be dynamic, expressive, often pioneering. They like to change. They're visionary, they're movement oriented, and they will amplify that jewel flower. So they're going to be learning through movement, but they tend to have a very strong intuitive sense, and they tend to be the born leaders. They motivate others. They can have all different types of tendencies or morphology, but they tend to communicate with movement, gestures. Again, very change oriented, explorers. The challenges, again, they have some of those underlying traits of jewel flower. They can be controlling, or they can be scattered and self-destructive or blaming. So what they need to learn is the consistency, the stability, building trust, and learning to trust, so that they can actually innovate and change and move society in a healthy manner. So those four iris types or personalities, the jewel, flower, stream, and shaker, represent four types of energies or forces within the universe. So the jewel is a very constricting force, very single pointed, and as Denny calls it, the electro force. Flower is more magnetic, it's expansive, it's spatial, and it has a more of an outward movement, where again, the jewel is inward movement. So you've got that yin yang, you've got the movement in and out. Stream is more of a constricting as well, gravitational force, but that is that grounding force. And I'll show you another slide that has some of that too. And shaker is that just force, that transformational force. I'm going to show you the next slide, and then Danny, I'd like you to give me a couple of comments on that too. As I said, the jewel is that gathering single point, which tends to be a little bit more yin, but again, it's all modified by the birth order. Yang, the movement outward, flower, stream could be yin, depending on the birth order, or if it's a jewel or flower. Shaker, same. Shaker tends to be more yang because it's a movement force. And then again, all of these tend to come in opposites, so that that's what you're exploring in a relationship, is that polarity between them allows you to now have some challenges that will force you to make choices so that you can learn and grow. Is there anything you wanted to say about that, Danny?
Oh, my button.
A lot, right?
Can you put up that one slide where all four of them were together?
This one? Or the back?
Yeah, that one.
This one.
Yes. Everyone has all 4 of these structures. Everyone has all 4. They use one most dominantly. The one they use most dominantly is the visible constitution of the iris. If you are one of these, ideally you need to practice the other 3. It's as simple as that. If you're the flower type in the upper left, you can see the physical structure of the iris as an expansive oriented pattern. This is a long-term genetic capacity.
I don't need this good. I don't need the color.
On the far lower right, the jewel pattern is obviously an opposite. Now, just to simplify it for you, and this is exactly how I work.
Oops.
Everyone, go back to the other one, please.
Yes, sorry.
Everyone is either a flower or jewel type. Every single person is dominant to either the flower or the jewel first. There is no exception. Doesn't matter if they look like they have stream or shaker, they're actually controlled by an interactive function of either flower or jewel. And then they're modified by the stream or shaker pattern. And yes, when you have a flower pattern, there's a natural tendency to want to creatively express, and 95% of the flower type constitutions, which means 95% of everybody who has a constitution like that, they move toward the father's family and away from the mother's family. 95% of the jewel types, they move away from the father's family and they move toward the mother's family. And everybody is doing that. What they do is they modify it by the other 2. The kinesthetic type is more of a consolidating holding force, more stable in the physical body, more neurotic in some ways. And then the shaker is a moving, they're opposite, but they're only modifiers of the original. Is it a jewel or a flower? Everyone is on the razor's edge of one side or the other. Very rare exceptions to it all. It'd be just accurate if you use just those 2. Now, the reality is, if you did combinations of the pairs, any combination of the pairs, you end up with, if you did it once, you'd get 8. If you did it again, you'd get 12. So you end up with 12 unique constitutional irises, personality patterns, and they actually work in a continuous pattern. Now, here's the very cool part. They work in an exact sequence. And there is no exception. They all work in an exact sequence. You may start somewhere on one of the constitutions, and then you'll rotate through all the other ones, but you're always starting at a flower, starting at a jewel, rotating to the other one, but always following the exact sequence. That's what interests me the most.
Yes. Even though your iris is not changing, you're experiencing things that all of these different patterns would have.
How you handle that rotational experience, that's your life. How you react to situations, your mother, your father, authority, women, men, whatever, all of that reaction produces your symptoms. So if you do 12 of those in a row, you just covered not only the 12 major constitutions, but you just covered all of the glands and organs and body systems, and you covered 12 grandparents who gave you the genetic and epigenetic information about how those cycles work. So you might be going through your cycle and you hit a bump in the road and you have a law of attraction event. But if you could look at it closer, that law of attraction event came from a particular grandparent somewhere in the family tree. Now, this is not woo-woo stuff. This is basic epigenetic science about stored emotional memory coming down through and creating these constitutional patterns. All of those slight deviations are all emotional memories given to you from someone. Your job, whether you choose to accept it or not, is to live inside of it and become responsible for what you got and then what you do with it. So that's what I'm most interested in. How do you use these constitutions? So that's where the work has taken me is, okay, so we have these constitutions. What exactly can we do? That's what I'm most interested in. I'd like to show you that eventually.
Yes, yes. And for those that are iridologists, you can be looking at different patterns here and say, oh, this has an inflammatory pattern here, out here on the flower with those little yellow dots. But in our system, we would say, well, that's related to a certain grandparent, and that's why it's showing up on the iris, or some of the little brown spots, you know, could be considered liver spots, but they're going to be in certain positions. And that too can give you, you can track it back to a specific grandparents as well. I'm just going to go ahead and jump forward to just some different irises, just so that you can get a feel for what we're talking about. So if we look up here on the upper left picture, you can see that there's a lot of the stream pattern, but then there's also some of the little flowers. So you would call that a flower stream. The one on the upper right, similar, has some of the stream patterns, but then a lot of the little flowers in here too. So you can call that a flower stream. Down here, that one's pretty obvious. So it doesn't have the little flower petals. It has these brown spots, but it also has this sort of tight weave. So again, you would, well, you would mostly call that jewel because there's so many spots here. This one has some of the brown spots more on the interior and then the stream pattern, but mostly it's the stream. So you can see you're going to be picking up on combinations of all of these. So no one iris is going to be exactly one or the other. Let's move to the next one. So again, just some more irises. You can see this has the flower pattern. It has some of the stream. You can tell it's an older eye because it has the cholesterol or arcus ring. But if you looked at it, you would call it a flower stream. This one too has all of those flower petals. So flower would be the main way of looking at it, but it does have some of the streams, so you can call it a flower stream. This one has some of those brown pigments and some of the stream. So you would call that a jewel stream. This one doesn't have much. Denny would probably call that maybe a flower stream, but mostly stream. So you can see lots of different presentations, and somebody in iridology would see these stress rings as well. So that's somebody that might be more on the sympathetic side. So a stream that has a little bit more anxiety to it. So we can go to another one. This one too has a lot of those little flower, but some stream. But mostly you would call that a flower. And I would also call this one a flower. This one, you see all the little brown pigments. So that's more likely jewel. But see how it has the stream? So it's a stream modified by the jewel. I would say similar to that one too, but more of a stream. Just so you get a feel for some of these. We'll just do a few more slides, and then what I'd like to do is go through some of the newer stuff, and then we'll take some questions at the end. Now, this one's an interesting one too. You see, it has the flowers, it has the jewels. So that's going to be more of a shaker. But because it looks like it has more flower petals, Does have a few jewels. It could be either, but I would call that a flower shaker. And possibly this one as well. See, it has the little jewels on the upper right and some flower petals. So again, flower shaker. This one does have a few of the little flowers, the bottom left, and then it also has a lot more jewels. So we would call that a jewel shaker. And then the bottom right would also more likely be a jewel shaker because the brown pigments are more pronounced. So I'm going to show you some pairs of slides. Very often the right and left eyes are different. It's rare that I see them exactly alike. So that's going to be some distinguishing characteristics as well, because here the right eye has a lot more flower petals. We used to look at it from right brain dominant versus left brain dominant. This would be more left brain dominant, but again, that's another modifier to what we're seeing. But overall, this is a flower person. So actually, I should have explained backgrounds. I'm an optometrist, so I look at eyes all day long. And I've been doing this for about 20 years since I read a book on iridology and then Denny's book on What the Eye Reveals. And it's really pretty amazing how accurate you can be between looking at the patterns and looking at the markings. You can really predict a lot of what has happened in the life and also where things came down through the family tree. So I've been doing that without even knowing about the birth order or the family systems that I've only known for the last 5 years. So for 15 years, just looking at the RAYID personality through the iris was pretty profound and very accurate. This is another set. I'm pretty sure that they had, this is where you do see some greater differences and you can see some jewels. And then you might also look at the location of the jewel, because the location of the jewel will give you an indication of what's going on in the body. And or the emotion that it corresponds to. Here's another one. You've got a big jewel up here, and some other little jewels down here. Do you want to say anything about something like that, Denny?
No.
No, there's too much detail. That again, we have a lot to still cover, but most of that you can find in his book. Here's another one with a shaker flower, I would call it. But again, looking at the different points, whether this would be more in a thyroid or this would be more in the heart area. You can look at the different areas and where these things are, and it gives you a really nice picture of what's going on with that person. Here's another shaker jewel. Here's more of a stream with maybe some flower petals here too. So again, it's giving you information about their mode of learning, about how they operate and or who they would attract in a relationship. Again, another set of eyes where you have a couple of little jewels, but mostly stream pattern. But this way you get a feel for eyes really different. Oh, I wonder whose these are. This one also a shaker flower, so a lot of flower patterns, and then some of the dark spots as well. Those are mine. So Denny mentioned the family systems. So this would be the children, which are the 6 birth order positions, the girls and the boys. And in the pictures, and you can see any of this on the RAYID website. We are in the process of updating it, but there's lots of graphics and lots of visuals that give you a better sense of everything that we're talking about. And then the books are all downloadable on there as well. And then hopefully Betty Sue can put a link to this slide presentation in the chat, or we can follow up if anybody would like as well. But each one of those are potential children. Then you've got the mother and the father. So the circle is always the females in the family. The triangle is always the male. And then on the mother's side of the family, you've got 6 grandparents. And on the father's side of the family, you've got 6 grandparents. And different birth order positions have more epigenetic traits from different grandparents. So just for example, this is number 1 on the father's side would be the father's mother. And that father's mother is most directly linked to a number 1 girl. Now, of course, not every family is going to have all of these different children. They might only have 1, 2, or 3, but you can think of these different children or the different grandparent positions as containing energy that we can actually access, utilize. We can be grateful for those different grandparents, and that could actually help our soul growth, but also heal things in the family tree that have been coming down for generations and that show up in the eyes and in the behaviors of the children and grandchildren. So looking at it from the family system standpoint, we can actually make recommendations, even if it's very simply, maybe get to know your grandparents, or can you be grateful for your grandparents? Or if we find that they're not really connected to their heart, or they have difficulty giving or difficulty receiving, then we can make some recommendations that might help them to spiritually open their hearts based on what we're seeing. Just to give you a little bit of a sense of what I'm talking about, the different birth order positions. And again, this would be something that we would cover in another webinar, hopefully next month. The different birth order positions correspond to different traits, attributes that we can aspire to. So you can think of it as the RAYID systems, the iris birth order, and when I talk about the cycles and seasons in just a few minutes, provide you with a map to developing the soul. So it's ways to develop these different attributes. So the number 1 boy, birth order position, but also the grandparent, which corresponds to the mother's father, has humility, imagination. So even just dreaming and aspiring and wanting to grow is a number 1 boy trait. And again, all of this you can learn more about online or on our Facebook page. There's lots of information there as well. So we can actually choose to aspire more. We can choose to aspire to be a better person. We can aspire to be more curious, which is the 3 boy, or we can engage and use our free will choice to be able to share our creativity. So all of these different male characteristics and all of these different female characteristics have different energies that we can literally grow through the cycles and seasons. So let me kind of cover those. In every 2-hour increment, we are accessing a different energy. So for the boys, the number 1 boy, it starts at midnight. Then the number 3 boy, the number 5 boy goes through during the day. So the boys go from 12 a.m. to 12 p.m. And then the girls, or the girl energies, you can think of it from in terms of chakras as well, if that is your bent. Those go from 12 p.m. to 12 a.m. And all of that corresponds to different seasons, different months. And again, you can get really bogged down in all of this. I'm just showing it to you. You can download these charts and it will cover this more in another time. But each one of those birth order positions or grandparents or siblings corresponds to different ages or timelines through our life cycle, but also different glands, organs, and systems. And so we can look at where there might be an ailment. Say somebody has trouble breathing. Well, that's the lung line, which is number 1 boy. So we might make some recommendations that would help them to move past or kind of clear or heal that epigenetic trait that's coming down. Another way to look at it too, so you can look at the irises, but then look at the body types. And the number 1 boy is typically thinner. The 1, 3, 5 boys are more yin in quality. The 2, 4, 6 boys are more yang. The girls would be the opposite. So the 1, 3, 5 girls are larger and the 2, 4, 6 girls are smaller. It's not 100%, but that also is another way to kind of get to know the person who's in front of you. You know, which birth order are they? And each of those birth orders has a different personality and energy. Then you modify it with the iris, where you see, they're more of a verbal processor. Oh, they're more, outwardly mobile. Oh, well, this is a number 1 girl who's got a more solid body type, and now she's a stream as well, a stream jewel. So then I know she's going to be very organized, very detail oriented, and she's going to be very grounded. So again, it's a lot of information to take in, but even if you just get the sense of, wow, we can look at eyes and body types and get a sense of who's in front of us so that we can know them better, and or if we're a practitioner, help them evolve. So this is what we're going to kind of end with. And then after that, we will take questions. In terms of the cycles and seasons, remember I said that every 2 hours of the day is a different energy or different birth order position. Well, the same could be said for each month. So in the fall, starting with September, we're running through the mother's side of the family, and that's a 2, 4, and 6 girls, and again, with different energy types. And then going to still on the mother's side of the family through winter, December, through to January to February, and February to March, we're going to be in the mother's side, again, with the yin. Those are the thinner men or boys on that side of the family, or the grandparents on the mother's side of the family. And then at the the spring equinox, we're going to be moving to the father's side of the family, the more yang siblings and or grandparents in terms of energy. So that's the 2, 4, 6 boys, and then the 1, 3, 5 girls. I should say girls there. Now, cycling all the way back to the irises, if you look at that, I'll just show you again. We went through this, which is the seasons of the year, and then going through each one of those birth order positions and grandparents. We can say the same through flower, jewel, shaker, and stream in terms of, it should have been, switch those. But the flower would be the 2, 4, 6 girls, because those are the ones that are more feeling oriented, increasing greater empathy. And then the 1, 3, 5 boys are more jewel focused thinkers. And then all of this is sort of in the quiet, in that fall, winter. That's kind of that internal. That's where we're feeling, thinking, and then getting ready to move out. And we're moving into the father's side of the family, the 2, 4, 6, mobilizing. And then this is the 6th boy in June. And right in June is when we switch over to the, again, father's side of the family, the 1, 3, 5 girls. And that's the more grounded, that's the manifestation. So first we feel, then we focus, then we mobilize, and then we manifest. So as Denny was saying, there's these 12 different types of irises, and that's really what we're going to be experiencing in terms of energies through the whole year. So each month we'll have a different energy, a different birth order, a different grandparent, but also a different energy that we might see in an iris. So I know it can sound a little complicated, but when we look at it from the iris standpoint, the birth order standpoint, we actually come to what we call the soul journey. So and you can think about it, it's actually just matching the natural rhythms in nature. You know, in the fall, we start to get quieter, we start to go more within. That's where we're developing our feeling skills. And that is the 2-4-6 girls and the mother side of the family. And we're taking it from the second chakra, it's 2 girl, which is very individual feeling, to then feeling an expansion out into others. And then at the 6th girl, which is kind of our feeling divinity, is really feeling so empathetically everything in this universe and beyond. Again, this is something that we can go over some more, but there's lots of information out there on all of this. In the winter, again, still kind of quiet. That's the just individual self of that jewel focus. I'm going to focus on my thoughts, my aspirations. With the 3 boy, I'm really looking at, and that's the scientist in me that wants to see what's happening out there. And then by the 5 boy, that's when I'm starting to want to share all of these things I've been feeling and thinking. So the feeling, the flower, thinking the jewel. And then now I'm going to start to engage that shaker, that outward expansion, mobilizing force, so I can transform all of these things that I'm feeling and thinking, and then consciously engage in action that helps others, and then leading great numbers of people with everything that I've developed in those 9 or 8 months before that. We just hit with number 3 girl, but at that summer solstice, we entered the 1 girl energy, which again is that individual incarnation, that singularity of embodiment and what I'm bringing to the table, and then how I share that with others and then with all. So again, in a lot of the spiritual teachings and all, just even intuitively, we have to take our gifts. So I look at the iris as actually kind of an imprint of, just like the fingerprint of who I am. You know, this is how I came in. That iris shows my innate characteristics, my innate gifts. But ideally, I want to be able to know myself well enough, feel, and be able to take all of that out into my community. So move from my family unit and everything that I learned and got epigenetically or emotionally or otherwise, and be able to share, ideally, my gifts with others, and then eventually with the all. So how can I actually take everything that I am and be able to feel that as part of a greater whole? And so that, you know, feel that place of I am one, but I'm also all. So again, this is another graphic of it, which is pretty impressive. But I want to be my individual rose. You know, this is my individual flower or rose that I can give as a gift to all through time, through the days, through the months, and then through the different seasons throughout my whole life. Again, it's a mouthful and it's a lot to take in, but to me, it's a beautiful way to honor myself, others, and all, and be in harmony with nature. You know, with being appreciative. You know, it was an interesting discussion because talking to somebody who really doesn't follow any kind of spiritual practice, even if simply I just acknowledge who I am, or I'm just grateful for every day, and I can say, wow, you know what, at sunrise and sunset, I'm grateful for a new day, for the energy that comes with sunrise, where I can engage and I can actually go out and do something with a meaning and purpose. And at the end of the day, at sunset, I simply spend 15 seconds and say, wow, you know what? I'm grateful for, you know, this and this and this. And I'm feeling good about being able to contribute to others through and be able to manifest my gifts. So that's kind of the overview of the iris. Again, you can check on RAYID.com. You can look on YouTube because Denny's got tons of videos on there, and then Facebook. There's some groups on Facebook, but look up RAYID International. I'm posting pretty much every day some of what we're talking about so that you get a feel for the different energies and the different birth order. And also you can think about it in terms of the iris structure, but if you really want to dive deep, you might have to read it 3 or 4 times to really get all the nuances, and that eventually will combine these 2 books. But what the eye reveals is really, I think, a great way to delve deeper into the RAYID iridology. And the Power of Birth Order is a real sweet book, but it gives you this overview of the feeling. So even if you just feel the innocence of a baby, wow, if you take a few seconds, even 15 seconds to feel that, and then recognize that that's how you came in. And as we said, the iris doesn't really change. That was our initial imprint. That was how we came into the world. And if we can actually just even feel and appreciate our incarnation, and then the fact that we're feeling individuals and that we have unique gifts, that's a beautiful practice. You know, especially when we live in a world where you can have some dejection or feel depressed or feel like, what's the point? No, the point is our individual imprint on the world. And RAYID is a way to be able to share that and to be able to step into who we are. I thank you for listening. I'm going to stop the share now. And Denny, I don't know if you want to share anything else. Otherwise, we'll be happy to take any questions.
Is there questions?
And you can just unmute if you'd like to.
Are there questions?
I think everybody's sitting in awe right now, going, going, wow. And also there's always, which one am I? You know?
Yes.
That's
Well,
what we are.
that's what I would say. You know, just start looking. I mean, the iPhones or the, you know, Android phones are so amazing. You can get pretty good pictures just with your phone. Typically you need a little brighter light source. So you either put the light on, or very often if I want to get a good photo, I'll just have somebody else shine their flashlight on the eye, and then I'll take a photo, and you get a really great photo.
Yeah.
So even when you get the PowerPoint, you just want to compare and see, oh, what am I like? And oh, yes, that's exactly me. Makes sense. Or if you want to get in touch with us too, we're happy to give you some more information as well.
Well, you know what, you've given us so much good information. And as you said, it's a study. So going to the Facebook page is an education in itself. You know, just reading those kind of solidifies placing ourselves. And I think it's fun to start looking at, you said it beautifully, the beginning and the end of the day.
Yeah.
It's you know, just getting to understand that.
Yeah. I mean, even if you looked at your iris and said, wow, I'm a jewel. Yeah, I am organized. I you know, I like communicating verbally, and that's a gift of mine. That's kind of cool. Or, you know, oh yeah, I'm a grounded type. Yes, I do. I'm the one that, you know, gets everybody together. Or, yeah, that's why I love sports as a kid. It's like anything else. The more you know yourself, the more appreciation you have of yourself and of ideally all God's creations.
Everybody's waiting for somebody to ask a question. Well, I put in the chat if they want me to send the presentation, the PowerPoint, that
Yes.
you know, I can send it. I have to get it from you to do
I'll
that.
fix the typos first and then.
Yeah, okay, and I'll send it out. And we also recorded it so that if we wanted to, we could also send the recording to people that aren't here.
Or we could post it on
Yeah,
YouTube.
post it's even better. Yeah.
Or both YouTube and Facebook.
And so about this time next month, what will we be talking about?
I'd ideally like to talk about birth order
Hmm.
and grandparents. So, you know, they kind of go hand in hand. And then in September, our plan is to work through a second year. So we've actually been working in cycles and seasons every single month, spending a month with a different energy. So back in September, in the Northern Hemisphere, we started with the number 2 girl, and that's all about feeling. So actually feeling, you know, saying, hey, I want to feel more. I want to know the truth about this feeling. So the protocol is actually to feel more. So if I'm angry or if I'm sad, or I had some feeling of, what was the feeling that I was dealing with yesterday and today? It was a feeling of criticism. So let me feel this criticism. Wow, let me really get underneath this. Where else have I felt criticized? Well, show me the truth about this feeling of being criticized. Okay, how long has it been there? Oh, it's been there a really long time. Oh, wow. You know what? And then I was at a family, as you said, I was away. And then I got to see and explore criticism. And it was like, wow, mothers and daughters were criticizing each other. Fathers and sons were criticizing each other. And sons were criticizing fathers, and daughters were criticizing mothers, and vice versa. And I was like, wow, this is pretty deep. Let me feel it. Let me actually ask to change this, to heal it. Let me ask for help and really working through this feeling and hopefully clearing it for my family and my children and their children. So it is actually an active principle once you understand, and you don't even have to understand the system at all. You know, just know that you're either a flower or a jewel, but you want to be able to embrace both. You want to actually feel all of our feelings. We want to actually think about them, but ask for help to really look at how they've impacted our lives, and then take it that next step to choose every single month to feel or engage different energies. So each birth order has a different feeling or a different energy. So right now, we're in the 3rd girl month, which is all about community, integrity, wisdom. So asking for wisdom to understand, okay, what is happening in my family? How can I feel strength and integrity and feel my unique self within a community? Or, I mean, think about it, even at work, or, you know, your social circle. I mean, I'm sure that we've all felt times where we've been criticized or not accepted, or whatever feeling comes up. Well, the 3 girl is really the time to explore our feelings within that community. So we can actually actively engage that and say, oh, let me feel into that. So each month is very rich, has many, many things, many questions that we can ask ourselves. And so in September, we're starting a whole new year of this. And the goal would be to actually take people through that, those that would like to and want to engage on this journey with us. And we'll be doing a retreat down in Mississippi in September and another one in Connecticut in October. But the goal is this is what we can do, is actually try to be better selves by honoring those cycles and seasons throughout the year and engaging different attributes that we can work with. So I see that there is a question. So that's a great question. What effect does the parent's eye type have in regards to the relationship with their children? For example, would a jewel mother be more likely to butt heads with jewel children and get along more with flower children? Denny, do you want to answer that question?
Go ahead.
So it's going to modify it in some ways. And again, you all also have to look at some of the nuances of those dynamics. So a jewel mother tends to be more controlling and more critical. So she could either overpower the jewel daughter or the jewel son, or that, and then cause a clash, so that jewel daughter would be like, no way, I'm in control, and move away from her. Or you could have a flower daughter that would now kind of flip and become more yin and be dominated by the mother. So again, there's different ways to look at it. And then the dynamics between mothers and daughters are going to be different between mothers and sons. And a lot of that we'll cover in terms of the dynamics between mothers and sons and mothers and daughters, and same with fathers in terms of birth order. So naturally, the firstborn sons are going to be closer to their mothers, and the firstborn daughters will be closer to their fathers. But like everything, there's nuances and exceptions to rules, and then the iris will modify those types of relationship dynamics as well. And many of them, I mean, I should say they're all predictable. That I'm not always as adept at as well. But we can go over some of that next time too. Being bold and being in education. This is so the first question was from Alexandra. This is from Janella. Being bold and being in education. This topic came up today, of course. We have this imprint of who we are, but how does this correlate with what is happening in our world with transgender issues? That's a challenging question. So it's a very confusing world. I mean, there's a lot of confusing messages, and I think it is challenging to raise children in today's world. At the same time, you've also got children that are very unique and individual and asking questions. So it's not necessarily apparent based on the iris, you know, who or what they are, but there are certain characteristics that I would say you could look at from the iris. And then you also have to look at that environment. Again, in my field, I look at each individual from mental, emotional, biochemical, physical, energetic, and spiritual standpoint. So when you look at all of these things, it gives you a greater picture. But as far as transgender and all that, it's a bit more complicated. I'd say too complicated to get into right now.
Yeah.
So any other questions or thoughts?
You know, what are your thoughts? When I was very early learning some RAYID iris, I remember someone telling me, I don't necessarily think it was Denny, but that a lot of times that we're attracted, you know, to our opposite structure, and that we come into the relationship like this, but as our vibrations change, you know, and Denny touched on that at the beginning about how, you know, it brings out that other part of us. Is that in relationship? Is that generally how that happens?
Yes, it's, I mean, we're seeking to fill what might be missing within ourselves. So we typically do attract opposites in relationships. But ideally, we're each individual souls, and we want to develop those characteristics within ourselves.
Right.
And ideally, we like to think of things in this figure 8 pattern. So we can intentionally engage in developing ourselves. So if we are more of a verbal processor, well, we can do things that can actually help us to be more feeling oriented. Or if we typically are very feeling oriented but don't speak up, we can actually learn to do that. And we can circulate those energies from those different months and times of the day.
Mhm.
Or, practice it. So if we understand, who we are, and again, are we more visual, more verbal, or more kinesthetic? Well, let me see where I land. Well, can I actually now practice, instead of talking? So somebody that's verbal processor tends to say, and they interrupt a lot and they'll nod their head. So if it's one of my patients, I'll say, see if you can just not speak. See if you can actually just feel all of your feelings without speaking them. So we can give ourselves or others homework, if you will, to be able to develop ourselves. And that's just going to enrich any relationship, because instead of being in this polar opposite, so unless you're really engaging, what can happen in your relationship is they never listen to me, or, he always does that and he shouldn't, but then if you're not really speaking up or communicating about it, or he's always over talking me or whatever, or she's always trying to control me, you're not really engaging in a healthy dynamic. So you want to be able to speak up and feel and be able to share with your partner. So understanding, I remember many, many years ago, one of the first combinations of irises that I did a consult on in terms of a relationship. One was just typically the flower, just very emotional and feeling oriented. And then the other one was the jewel, and really just saying, well, you like to be demonstrative, you're going to express yourself. Well, he's going to be thinking about it. So just understanding that they were opposites actually helped the relationship, because now it wasn't like, he wasn't listening to her or she was being too dramatic. That's just, how she came in. So that helped them to understand each other better. Any other questions or thoughts? I used to have a patient, he literally would bring his girlfriends to me, and he had like 3 or 4, and he got to meet them at one point because he wanted to know, all right, is she a fit for me? I guess it could be used as a dating app, but.
Did you ever say, just no, it's not going to be able to work this out?
Yes. That didn't go over well, but.
Right.
Ultimately, you have to take personal responsibility for everything, because anything in the relationship that's not working is a direct result of what you are putting into it or not putting into it, or what you're being responsible for or not. So I think that's really the key aspect of this, is really to develop or help people to engage in personal responsibility. Anyhow.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great. And I'm looking forward to getting into birth order next time. And then maybe next time you can also let people know a little bit about, if they wanted to investigate coming to the retreat, what that might be like as well.
Great. we can,
That's
yeah,
in September. It's coming up.
it's coming up soon. That first, well, right after the weekend after Labor Day weekend. So we'll have some more details. And again, I post events on Facebook, RAYID International, so you can get more information there. But thank you so much to everybody that did attend. And I know some others want to watch after the fact, but thank you, Betty Sue, for hosting us. And Benny, as always, thank you for your beautiful work.
Okay. Thank you, Denny. Thank you, everyone. All right. Good night.
Bye. Good night. Thanks.